Good morning, welcome to Llanblethian Orchards. I thought today I'd do a virtual orchard tour now my pear trees are in flower and just talk about the peri-pear varieties I grow down here. So as you've just seen in the intro here, the orchard's on the floodplain between Cowbridge and Llanblethian, so it's quite low-lying ground. There's a stream that runs through my land and it's bordered by the river Thorn. You can probably hear some chainsawing today as the farmer who leases the land next door is redoing the fencing. So I apologise for any noise there. But the orchard itself is planted in the style of the Gwent levels. This is low-lying land here and the trees are planted on raised soil mounds in the same way as the Gwent levels. The idea being the roots will stay above the water table in winter because they're growing in this raised soil mound, so the roots won't be killed off by the winter damp. Because apple or pear trees, if the roots are under the water table for more than a fortnight, the roots will asphyxiate and the trees will die. So this orchard is planted in quite a standard traditional method. But we're just going to walk through the orchard now and I'm going to talk about each of the pear trees I grow in turn, and you can just see the trees and have a little virtual walk through my orchard. So if we turn around now, we can have a look at the this area here is a new planting. As you can see, there's some beehives there as well. And this is apple tree varieties I haven't grown in the orchard before, and I'm just trial planting here just to see, to try and find new bittersweet cider apple varieties that will grow well down here. But at the edge of this new planting there is one pear tree that will fly over to now, as you can see it here. It's currently in flower. It's a pretty little tree in truth, and it's Tainted Squash. I've since discovered there's actually in fact two Tainted Squashes, an early Tainted Squash and a late Tainted Squash. And it's just to do with the harvest period. This is an early October tree, so it must be the early Tainted Squash. The fruit itself does rot very quickly, so it's a bit of a pain because by the time the tree's 50% dropped, it may already be overripe, and I've missed the harvest period a couple of times now. The tree itself, you can see, it's slightly dwarfing, but it's fairly healthy here. And the fruit itself, I think, is more of a blender peri-pear. There is a bit of tannin, a bit of sharpness in there, but it's a rather indescript flavour. So it's fine in a blend, but I don't think it makes an exceptional single variety peri. One of my old books about this variety does seem to imply it was used in the First World War to tan some of the desert uniforms, believe it or not. I'm not sure how true that is, but certainly there's enough tannins in there. And peri-pears are quite notorious for staining clothing. In fact, they somehow even stained the epoxy paint on the floor of the barn, Lord only knows how. When I was a smaller cider maker, I used to store the sacks of pears in the barn overnight, and I don't do that anymore because it stained the floor of the barn, believe it or not. But you can see it is a pretty little tree, and it's currently in a flower. But we'll spin round now, and we're going to go into the main part of the orchard here. So you can see there's been quite a bit of rain recently. There's a crossing point over the ditches here, and you can kind of see down below there's still standing water there. It'll hopefully dry out soon, but at the moment it is pretty damp in this orchard. It's a bit too damp really to easily come down with the tractor and trailer without messing up the land. Now, one advantage I do have with this drone is I can fly over the stream here and go up to the first big tree. Okay. So we can see there's a lovely pear tree here, can't we? It's a huge tree. It's just about to come into flower. It's a bit early for it flowering itself. You can see it's got this kind of tall snaking habit here. Pear trees do get quite a bit larger than apple trees, so eventually when this orchard is fully mature, you'd expect the pear trees to quite visibly stand out compared to the apples. And so this tree here is Helen's Early, which is an early pear variety. It's kind of September or early October variety. It does have a bit of an issue, this tree, is it's got some kind of pear scab or canker. There's dieback on the branches, especially on a wet year, which is annoying. And it causes the fruit to crack quite heavily. So you need a dry summer really to get the best out of it, because if the fruit cracks, it can quite often rot before it's fully ripe. And so when you're harvesting it, you'll have to discard quite a bit of fruit. And the trees I've seen in Monmouthshire do have the same issue. So it's, to say it sadly, it's characteristic of the variety. I probably wouldn't plant the variety again, but the fruit itself is got on a good hot sunny year, it has a wonderful fruity character to it, and it makes a lovely light refreshing perry with a noticeable amount of tannins in truth. Okay, but we'll manoeuvre through the branches now without hitting too many of them, and we'll move on to the next tree. Okay, so give me a second, I'm just eyeballing the drone to make sure I don't total too much. Right, here we go. We'll start with this rather odd thing here. This is sadly a pear tree that died. The tree just completely died and it looked, well, dead as a dodo, and after a couple of years I felled it and cut it off at the base, and then the rootstock started growing again, because these trees are grafted, so there's a different variety for the roots and the top. And I just left it be essentially, because you do have to leave the ground fallow for a period of time after digging up a tree, and I didn't really feel it was worth it. And as the rootstock started growing again, I've actually grafted over it. So the bits that are flowering is a variety called Barnet, which is another variety I grow, but perhaps one day that'll grow into another tree, but we shall see. But I didn't really see any reason for the tree to die. It looked like it was struggling for a few years. The variety was called Gin, and it didn't put on much new growth. So I think it was, I don't really know what was wrong, but there's something wrong with the tree. If we spin around here, this is my favourite pear variety to grow, to make into single variety perry here. Now it's got these snaking branches at the base, but this variety is actually known for forming a quite small compact tree with a lot of vertical growth. The lower branches in the base have just been pulled down by the weight of fruit. As you can see, it's actually quite heavily laden with fruit this year. And the variety Thorn, which this one is in fact the oldest pear variety in the United Kingdom. It's one of the sharp citrusy lemony pears, because with pears, some pear varieties, the main constituent acid is malic acid, and with others it's citric acid. And this is one of the pears with a lot of citric acid in. So it's got a wonderful lemony, sharp flavour. And I think it makes a great single variety perry, especially sweet, because sweetness and acidity counterbalance one another. And as it's quite a sharp pear, it may end up over sharp if you do it fully dry. But it's my favourite single variety I grow, I'd say. I think it makes a wonderful product. And the variety is also known to fruit when young. So if you are looking at planting a pear orchard of traditional varieties, I would strongly consider Thorn. It's an early September variety. It does rot fairly quickly, so you do need to keep an eye on it. Some years it might be going on to later September, but you just need to watch it. When it does start dropping, you need to essentially get ready to process soon. Okay, the next pear tree, you can see it's quite a bit smaller than the one next to it. This is Chapman's Orange, and this is a rediscovered pear variety that was found on a farm outside Cardiff. I don't know too much about the variety in truth, as the tree's quite small. The pears themselves have a really pretty, you know, distinct shape. They're quite small, they're very, very pear-shaped, and they have this wonderful, vivid, bright orange colour. In fact, it almost looks like somebody's photoshopped the fruit. but I've never had really enough to do a decent single variety batch to see what it's really like. I suspect it does make a fair perry, I've been told it has. The issue I have with this tree, sadly, and this is the same with all bar 2 of my Welsh pear varieties, they all came from the same nursery, and they were supposedly on a full-size rootstock, but there's something wrong with them, and the rootstocks are a narrower diameter than the top variety, and they've never rooted very well into the ground. It might be hard to see there, but the trees are very liable to fall over and they look a bit stunted, so there's some kind of issue with the rootstock. It's I find it annoying, but I just don't think it's worth just ripping the trees out and starting again. I've been considering grafting up some of these other Welsh varieties onto more vigorous rootstock and trying in another part of the orchard essentially, but I'll move on now to the next tree. So the next tree is coming up here on the left. So you can see it there. It's another quite large tree. I'm in danger of hitting a branch behind there. But this tree here is yellow Huffcap. If you've know too much about perry, you'll notice there's a lot of different trees that are called something Huffcap, like yellow Huffcap, red Huffcap, Hendry Huffcap. And Huffcap's an old word. It has a few different meanings, but essentially it's somebody who's like in a cap who's getting hot unbothered. So I'd say it sounds like a good indication that these kind of varieties made it a quite strong drink. I'm not sure the Portman group would appreciate things being called Huffcaps anymore if they knew the meaning of the word, because it sounds like you drink this and you're going to get rather inebriated and quite fighty. But the variety itself, yellow Huffcap's another one of the citrusy, lemony pears. I really do adore the lovely, bright, lemony flavour of the citric acid in the perry pear. So a lot of my varieties have been selected for this. It's a vigorous variety down here. It did take a long time to fruit. Yellow Huffcap is a variety that's known to take a long, to be a little bit problematic, and the fruit can hang onto the tree too long. I find I have to shake these trees and pick them about 3 or 4 times in a year. So they drop over a long period of time. And if you waited till all the fruit was down, the early fruit would have rotted out. The later fruit that's been on the tree for the longest period of time is obviously the highest quality. It has the most sugar content in there. It has the richest flavour. I always consider that the late season pick, and that's like the special blend for the cider maker himself. But it is a wonderful pear variety, yellow Huffcap. It's very well regarded. Nice amount of acidity in there, a decent tannic body, and it makes a very good single variety perry. And the trees themselves are vigorous, and this is one of the smaller examples of it, but they grow into fair sized trees. They do take a long time to start fruiting though. They were pretty much the last variety to fruit down here. The orchard was planted 2007, and they must have been about 5-year-old trees when they were planted, and they didn't actually produce till about 3 years ago. So you can see it took over a decade before they did anything. But we're now moving on to the next tree here. Now this is gin. This is the sister tree of the one that died I showed you earlier. This one, it does fruit fairly well, but it doesn't actually produce much new growth. So I think it struggles down here in these conditions, sadly. The tree doesn't look too stunted, but it was fairly large when it's planted and hasn't grown much. It's fairly productive fruit-wise though, and the fruit itself is produces a wonderful, characterful perry. And on a very good year, if you've got a lot of sun and you're lucky, in fact, the botanicals in the finished perry can almost taste reminiscent of gin. It's only happened once or twice to me, but other cider makers have confirmed it, and they have made products that almost taste like gin. So I'm guessing that's what the name of it is. It's a nice enough perry variety, but if you've got these heavy clay damp conditions, I'm not sure it would be the best variety. I wouldn't plant it in bulk, basically. Okay, I'm going to have to swap the battery now, so I'll have to land and swap over, but we'll carry on the orchard tour now. I've got 3 batteries with me. This tree in front of me now is called potato pear. It's a fairly famous old variety. I see grown a lot round Monmouthshire. It's so called potato pear because it has these kind of round, russeted, browny green pears that do look a lot like potatoes in truth. It's another one of these citrusy pears, so it's got a lot of citric acid in, but it's got a very indistinct muddy flavour. I don't think it makes it a good single variety perry, and I know 2 other cider makers from Monmouthshire that also have tried making single variety and selling it, and it doesn't click with the customers. It doesn't sell well single variety, but it does work well in a blend. In fact, the first gold medal for my perry I ever won was a blend of 3/4 Henry Huffcap, 1/4 potato pear. So I use it in my perry blends, and I think a small amount does add a little something to the perry. It kind of adds a bit more complexity to the body of it, but yeah, on its own as a single variety it's just too much, and it's a bit of an odd flavour. So I'd recommend growing a small amount, certainly, but I wouldn't get your hopes set on single variety if I were you. Anyway, we've moved on to the next tree now, as you can see, and this is another one of the pear trees known for both fruiting when young and forming quite small trees. And this one here is called Barnet. I've got to say I do like this variety, but perhaps I shouldn't. Barnet is, it produces these very green pears that are large and very dumpy shaped. In fact, one of its pseudonym names in the countryside is hedgehog pear, because supposedly when the pears are just nestled in the grass, they almost look like baby hedgehogs just sitting there, shape-wise at least. I think it's a little fanciful, but that is one of the other names for it. And because the pears are quite large, it makes harvesting very easy. It's another fairly early variety in, say, October, and to get the most out of it, you need to use these pears when they're properly ripe. Underripe, they just lack any of the kind of flavour compounds you really need. It's a sharp perry pear, so it's got a lot of the acidity in there and not too much tannins. And if you get them when they're very ripe, there's a decent amount of fruitiness, but it's not regarded as that premium of pear variety. I think it makes a pleasant single variety, dry bottle conditioned perry, but it's always quite thin. It's more for people who appreciate the different pear varieties. But it's a productive tree that fruits when young, so certainly if you're planting a pear orchard, it might be worth considering. I'm grafting up more of it myself, and it goes into my blends, so say that could go into the blend with the Henry Huffcaps, which will fruit later in the season from it. I think it has merit, but it's again not one that is probably going to win you many awards single variety. Okay, we'll drift through now. We'll go sideways. Apologies, I hope that didn't give you motion sickness. Right, so this is one of my more problematic pear varieties. This one here is Brandy. It's another pear variety that's known to produce naturally quite small trees and fruit when young. And it certainly does both of those things, but I've got 3 Brandies in the orchard, and bar one other one that's on drier ground, it seems to struggle in these damper conditions. It doesn't produce much new growth, and the fruit itself, it's a medium sharp, and it has a deep rich colour, almost like brandy, but it's I don't think it's that much of a premium perry pear. The pears are quite small with a pretty red flush and a standard pear shape. I think is that called pyriform. But it's not a variety I rate too highly. And in fact, this tree here, it's been sending up a few branches on the stem, and you may or may not be able to see, I'm actually just put grafts onto there. The idea being, I was a bit worried about doing a cleft graft, just chainsawing the top of the tree off and trying to put a graft there, because if it fails, I've knackered the tree. So I thought, well, these branches are just coming up on the stem, and I've just grafted on some yellow Huffcap. It's a much more vigorous variety, and if it does take, I'll let that grow through the canopy, then cut off the top variety. It's a bit of a long-term plan, but that's essentially what I'm going to do with that. I'm going to leave one Brandy in the orchard in the driest spot that's growing better, and the other two are grafted over, one with Thorn, one with yellow Huffcap. Okay, we'll move on now to the next tree. You'll probably see a nice flowering pear tree on the left now, and that's another Thorn Perry pear there. You can see the bottom branches are spreading out, but as we lift up through the canopy, you can probably see that it's quite vertical near the top, and it's flowering very well this year in truth. So fingers crossed, between the two trees I'll have enough to do a small batch of single variety Thorn Perry for next year. Now you can see a tree next to it with a strap on it. This is another one of the Welsh Perry pear trees, and this one fell over. It's fallen over twice and it's been propped up twice, and I think the tree may have had its chips in truth. You may or may not be able to see, but if I try and get really close, you might just be able to see that the tree's very damaged under the graft point, and it's quite a bit thinner down the base there. You may be able to see if I just slowly rotate around. So it's something to do with the rootstock. I really wish I knew. I'm half tempted to dig out some roots and get them genetically tested, just to know what the hell the issue is. But it's live and learn. This is in fact the dampest part of the orchard. If I just spin around as well, it's a miracle anything grows here. You might notice there's a lack of soil on parts of the ground. There's usually a lot of standing water here, so it's a miracle much grows in this spot. Pear trees are known to survive a bit more damp ground than apples, but still nothing's going to survive too much. So this is a bit where it's always going to be problematic. And the variety itself is called Guehelog Red. And I've taken some of the graft wood of this, and I've actually grafted it on some of the roots that were growing up from the ground of one of the more vigorous pear trees. So I'm attempting to save the variety. I don't know too much about it. Guehelog Red was discovered with its sister tree, Guehelog, on a farm in a village of that namesake in Monmouthshire. But I've never had enough to really know what it's like. Now the tree next to it, you can see, it's a nice vigorous tree here, and you can see the difference in size, certainly. This is another one of the Helen's early trees. It's a little bit early for it to be flowering yet, but you can see it's a pretty vigorous tree, and it looks like there's going to be a fair amount of flowers, which is going to be nice this year. But we'll move on now through the orchard, and we'll try and find some more trees to talk about. I think we're approaching the largest pear tree at the edge here. We're right close to the stream here, and it's actually the driest part of the land this side, which is a bit ironic. But the reason you see all this vigorous weed growth here at the edge is the stream's just by the fence there, and Natural Resources Wales come through every year as part of their flood prevention, and they dug out and enlarged the stream. It used to be a tiny little piece of water, and now it's almost like a lake. But because they're digging out all that soil, the ground's very fertile here, and it's meant this pear tree has grown up into a very large tree. And this is another one of the yellow Huffcaps. In fact, it's snapped its canopy out before now, sadly, under the weight of crop. But it seems to be growing very well there, so it looks like conditions are perfect. Pear trees don't like it if it gets too dry. I know I said earlier that they don't like it too wet. They are quite fussy. They don't want it too wet, they don't want it too dry. And so I've seen where you've got pear trees in soil where it really dries out over summer, and it really doesn't help them. But we'll move on now to the another tree here. In fact, we're going to move on to the other Huffcap tree I grow now. You can see a tree in the background here, and this is Hendry Huffcap. the other Huffcap I grow. And Henry Huffcap's what's known as a sweet perry pear. So it doesn't have that much acidity or that much tannins, but it makes a wonderful single variety perry, even though it lacks both those characters. Certainly in cider making, that sounds a bit peculiar, because usually in British cider we're always talking about the amount of tannins in there, and you've got to have some bitters in your blend and everything. So turning around and saying, oh, this pear variety has none of those in and still makes a premium product can be a little counterintuitive. But you can see it's a very tall, very vigorous tree. And I'm trying to see if I can work out what it says. Well, the drone says it's 10 metres off ground level, so you can see they're pretty tall trees now, and that's going to be a good crop on there. The Henry Huffcap pears look very similar to the yellow Huffcap in truth. The main real difference is the yellow Huffcaps have slightly more coloration in there. The Henry Huffcaps can be a bit more of a kind of ruddy orange brown colour, and they're slightly dumpier in shape, whereas the yellow Huffcaps have more of a traditional pear shape. But again, you see very vigorous tree there. The ground's getting a bit drier at this side, and so you'll see these last trees all get bigger, and in truth, as the trees are getting larger here, they're all forming their own kind of microcosm. Trees when large do suck an awful lot of water out of the ground, so they're naturally drying the soil to a degree, and I've always wondered whether or not to just plant the rest of the land with some other kind of tree just to help dry it out. As I was talking to someone recently, in fact, about just planting huge amounts of willow, which is a fairly insane thing to do given how voracious it can be in taking over the land, but it's one of the fastest growing woods, and well, with the price of energy at the moment, growing a large amount of wood to burn for fuel could be a good idea. But this tree next door, I'm obviously flying up and down on. This is, I think this is the prettiest pear tree I grow. It's certainly my favourite pear tree to look at, and this is Guehelog. This is pretty much the only of the Welsh trees I got from that nursery where the rootstock's much cop. The roots in this are actually much stronger than the top variety. And Guehelog is a variety, it's the first variety to flower in the orchard. The flowering's already been and done basically, and it's the first to drop the fruit. It's a August pear. It has these kind of dumpy, quite small orangey pears that rot very quickly. It's not really a premium variety, there's not much tannins or acidity in there. It's very much a blender. It does go into, say, my blends with my Thorn if I want to reduce the acidity. And I also use it for ice perry. I've done that a few times. I love the tree for the prettiness, and if you just want to grow a tree to look nice, a pear tree, it's something to consider. But you know, the leaves themselves, you won't be able to see on the drone, do have a nice, almost downy appearance, especially on the underside when they're young. Very, very pretty tree, with this nice kind of compact, almost woodland tree shape there. But not a premium variety really. The ice perry I make out of it's about the best use for the fruit, because with ice cider or ice perry you're concentrating the juice, and as there's not much tannins or acidity in there, you end up not over concentrating it while still concentrating any of the apple aroma compounds in there, and it makes a fair ice perry, but it's not much other use for it as a variety. Now you can see I'm lining up on the tree next to it, and this it's got its off year this year, so it's not really fruiting. But this is Butt, which is a very famous old pear variety. And Butt as a variety, it's a bit of an infamous variety. It takes a long time for the fruit to soften up ready for harvest after dropping. So you might pick the fruit when it's been lying on the ground for some period of time, and it might still be another 3-4 weeks before it's ready to actually press. The trees themselves are nice and vigorous, and they have this kind of snaking, spreading habit. They send up a lot of vertical branches at the start, as you can see, and then later on they obviously start spreading the weight of fruit, and in fact on its on year the ground underneath can be completely covered in a sea of pears. The perry itself is very acidic, very tannic. I like it single variety myself, but I'm more of a traditional cider drinker. I like some, what in camera they describe as challenging ciders. It's not really that commercial a variety for the modern audience, I'd say. It's fair enough in a blend, but the other issue with it is there's so much tannin in there, and the tannins in pears can precipitate out quite badly in storage, and this variety is known for it. So you can it can keep on dropping a sediment basically in your fermenters, or when you bottle condition it for a long period of time, and it takes a long time for it to be in a state you could really get it saleable for the general public. Because I've bottled it before and thought, oh, it looks fairly clear, it'll be fine, and then 6 months later there's another massive deposit in the bottle. I'm like, oh great, well that's not a premium perry then. But I do like the trees. I've only got 2 of them down here, but it's just a word of warning. It very much depends on your audience whether or not that would work for you, and I'm just trying to negotiate over these trees here and fly. And this next one you can see heavily in flower below us here is another one of the Barnet pear trees. I've got 2 of them in the orchard, and they've decided to be biennial and swap the year they're going to have their on year essentially. So unfortunately what that means in practice is I don't have quite enough for a full barrel off these 2 trees each year. But it is a lovely pear variety there. And I do think they're lovely pretty trees. The fact they fruit so heavily when young, and the fact that the fruit's of such a large size is actually very handy. Because I hand pick in the orchard, and the honest truth is the larger a fruit is, the faster you can get a given weight of fruit out of the orchard. So something like this is wonderful because I can go through myself on my own, and in a few hours I've got enough to get quite a large tank of perry done. Whereas if the pears are just tiny little pound coin size things, say, you know, an inch across or whatever, you could have a team of people picking all day and just not get much usable fruit. Oh, apologies. I actually jabbed the look down then. I'm just going to lower the brightness a bit if I can. Okay, it's getting a bit bright here as the sun's come out. We'll move on to the next tree now. Okay, you can see this little tree here that's propped up. It's another one of the Welsh pear trees. And this one's never fallen over, but it's got quite a lean on it. It's not well held in the ground again, and it's the rootstock's a bit smaller diameter than the top work. Now the variety itself is called Llanblethian Green. That's another Welsh variety. It is well regarded. I've not had enough fruit off it to really do anything with myself, but it is a well regarded variety, and it seems to grow fairly well down here. It's just, I would say, the rootstock there is the issue, so I can't really talk too much about that, sadly. Now I'm just going to have to land again and change the battery, so I do apologise. If you give me a second, I'll switch the battery over. Apologies for having to land again for the battery, but yes, this Llanblethian Green, I've tried it a single variety from other cider makers. It does taste like a nice variety, and I may well just try and graft up some more trees of it and plant them somewhere else to see. But I've never had enough off that one little tree to really do much with. If we whiz across now, that's another, the big tree next to it is another of the Henry Huffcaps, and you can kind of see the difference in size. I mean, we're pretty much at the top of this little tree here, aren't we? And we're what's this say now? 4 meters tall, and bearing in mind we're on about ½ meter of raised mound as well, and then we whiz all the way up here, and so we're getting up to, what's it, 8.5 meters there. So it is a fair distance and difference in size there. Okay, you can see there, that's the other Henry Huffcap there. You can see how much larger that variety is, can't you? They grow about 2 foot a year, I mean, fair play. And this area, as I kind of implied previously, at the top end of the orchard, it's getting a lot drier now, just to the size of trees, because when trees get up to that size, they're sucking up a hell of a lot of water on the ground each, so it's creating its own microclimate here, this part of the orchard. And you see the smaller tree there on the right that I'm just looking at now. That's another one of the Helen's earlies. That one's always been a bit stunted as it's a bit wet down here, and it seems to be growing better now and growing more, and I think it's just a case of the land's drying out. So if you look at this tree next door that's right in the view of the camera, this is another one of those Brandies, and this is the one I'm grafting over with Thorn. And you can see it's it does struggle as a variety. It's just it obviously doesn't like these damp conditions down here. And you've seen, compared to the other pear varieties, when you look at that tiny one, then you see the one in the background behind this apple tree, and there's no real comparison, is there? You know, you've got that tree there and you're going, well, that's a big thing there, and then you look at this tiny one. So choosing the variety of tree is quite important for your conditions, I'd say, and obviously the length of time before it starts fruiting. It's just things to think about if you want to plant an orchard. I mean, if you're young, and I did plant this orchard in my 20s, and you're willing to wait, I'd certainly consider the bigger varieties like Henry Huffcap, Yellow Huffcap. You see, in the long run, they will reward you. I mean, I did 800 litres of perry last year off this orchard here, and it was predominantly these Huffcaps together with, say, the Barnets that were filling up the tanks, in truth. You know, with a little bit from one or two of the other varieties, but it was mostly those two that were doing all the work. So certainly having those kind of Huffcap varieties on this big rootstock is producing a sizable crop now after a decade. I'm just lowering down to try and whiz through, and we'll talk about the last trees now. Now, if we head down here, you can see on the left, that's another one of the butt pears. Again, it doesn't want to fruit this year. It's got its off year, but it does have this quite characteristic shape, doesn't it? An awful lot of vertical spreading growth there. They look like they're going to be very large trees, in truth. They just have that look. And if we whiz down here, I've got two trees here that I bought as a variety called Green Horse. And it really isn't. They're mystery trees. Green Horse is another one of the lemony, citrusy pear varieties that produces these quite sizable, vivid green pears, and they have a high acid content, whereas the pears of this are these small, russeted things with not much acid in there, a little bit of tannin, and a kind of nondescript flavour. So Lord only knows what these trees are. And I really need to get them tested. I've got two of these not Green Horse trees down here. In truth, they are quite productive, and if I fly in close here, they keep on snapping the branches under the load on their on year. They're quite biennial, so this is their off year, but you may just be able to see there's a kind of snapped branch leaning over in the top, and I missed it when I was pruning, so I'm going to have to come back and prune that. But yeah, Lord only knows what that is. It's whatever it is, it's really a blending pear. It doesn't make a good single variety, but it's, again, just we'll go into, say, my core blends of my medium Glamorgan Perry and my, say, Sweet Pixies pear. And if we look here next to it, there's another large pear tree behind, and this is another one of my Helen's earlies. But this is a good tree to just very briefly talk about, because it's growing up from the roots, and I need to dig out these roots here. But what I've been doing is, when the more vigorous trees send up these kind of branches from the roots, I've been digging them up, potting them up, and growing them into new rootstock, and then grafting over, essentially. Waste not, want not. There is an oak tree seedling there. The squirrels have planted, and he's coming out. It could be damage on the roots caused by squirrels, perhaps, that's causing these roots to pop up. But you can kind of see the issue. But because these trees are so vigorous there off that rootstock, I think it's well worth using those roots to graft up some new trees. So I guess it'll be next year now, as it's a bit too late in the year to do much. But that's all the different pear varieties I grow. I'll just fly over the orchard now again from above, just so you can really see what they look like. if we just manipulate up, you can kind of see, you can see the size difference now when I spin back round. So yeah, you can see there's vast sorts of swathes of land I don't really do anything with. I leave it for nature, this far end. I need to go in and cut the willow back, but it's left as a wildlife preserve. So apologies, I'm rocking back and forth now. But you can kind of see the slightly whiter trees in there, and I'll just I'll darken the image a second so you can see it better as we fly over. But you can see the size of the pear trees. They usually have a much more vertical habit than the apple trees, and you can see the fair size of them here. They are beautiful trees, pear trees, really. They really do stand out now. But I hope that's been of interest to you, and I hope you consider perhaps growing some pears yourselves. They always say plant pears for your heirs, so it's very beautiful to watch them grow down here. As I say, they can survive a bit more damp than apples, it's always been said, but you still need a drier land than this. I mean, if you really look, you can see there's a stream going through there, and you can see the River Thorn right there. So this is low-lying ground, and as you've seen in the video, they're all planted on the raised mounds in a style similar to the Gwent levels, and you can see there's a drainage ditch on the left as well, in fact. But this is just a very traditional way of planting an orchard on the essentially on the damp ground, lying alongside, say, the River Severn, or in the Gwent area, or in obviously places like this in the Vale of Glamorgan. But I hope that's been of interest to you, and I'll do another virtual orchard tour again in probably mid-May now, when the apples themselves are in flower. I've got about 50 different apple varieties down here, so I'll try and talk about as many as I can, but it's obviously going to be quite difficult to get through all of them on this much battery charge. But thank you once again. I hope this has been of interest to you. See you next time.